The Navy encounters rough seas with one of the worst scandals in its history. A contractor was arrested in San Diego and several officers have been targeted. Plus, how cuts by Congress to the food stamp program are affecting businesses as well as the poor in San Diego. And the wave of campaign messages has crested as San Diegans prepare to vote for mayor on Tuesday. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, November 15th. I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Tony Perry, San Diego Bureau Chief for the Los Angeles Times, Megan Burks of KPBS News, and KPBS Metro reporter Sandhya Dirks. The working poor and those mired in poverty rely heavily on food stamps to survive each month. So when Congress allowed increases to the program's budget to expire this month, the impact was directly felt in several San Diego neighborhoods, including City Heights. And we'll explore that in a moment. But Megan, before we get to food stamps, there was dramatic news regarding Obamacare this week about the changes now, the late-minute changes. What did the president say yesterday, and what's happening with that program?
Yeah, the president reacted yesterday to a public upset that a bunch of insurance policies are being canceled when he didn't expect them to be canceled. And so yesterday...
Several million across the country.
And so yesterday he announced that he would give insurance companies an additional year to phase those plans out. Mm-hmm.
And they don't have to do that, right? It's kind of a request thing. He's bending some arms on that.
Will you please kind of make these plans go on? But it's really up to the insurers as well as the state insurance commissioners.
So briefly, which policies are these and why were they canceled?
These are mostly plans on the individual market, and they were being phased out because they didn't comply with some of the more strict regulations under the Affordable Care Act. So offering more coverage, having to pay less for that coverage.
Mm-hmm. Tony, you look like you're...
Well, am I right? We're a little better off in California. Our system, our computer techs seem to be working better than the ones in the nation's capital. Am I right or am I wrong?
Right. Covered California is doing much better than the healthcare.gov website. We actually enrolled about 33% of the total national total of people who have signed up for these new plans. So we're doing really well.
What do we know that they don't know? Do we just have smarter geeks or what?
Well, definitely. It's called Silicon Valley.
California. Well, I mean, they have a lot bigger program, a lot more people, many states to deal with. Some states and governors are resisting it. California, we were way ahead of the game, weren't we? We bought in early, as it were.
Yeah, California has always been kind of the front runner with this, and so I think that we got ahead of it.
So now a lot of these folks, of course, were unhappy. All of a sudden they're getting their policies, but they just weren't up to snuff. They were kind of junk, is it fair to call it junk policies, as it were?
Yeah, there have been some reports that when people looked at these policies that they were defending so much, when they stepped back there, they realized that they were only getting $50 in coverage for a hospitalization. But in some cases, maybe it's not offering enough mental health coverage. Maybe it's, just it needed a little bit of a tweak. It wasn't up
to the standard. Sally?
Do you know that if it was the insurance companies in some cases that, it was up to them, right? So it was sort of their decision. So the government sort of betting on the insurance companies to do what's best for the government. It's kind of a funny proposition, especially because they were so opposed to Obamacare at the beginning. Do you know if the insurance companies have they responded? Has Obama blamed them?
So with this administrative change that he announced yesterday, insurance companies did step forward and say they're a little unsure if they can kind of do a take back. A lot of them have already put these cancellation notices out. And a lot of them are worried that, as well as state insurance commissioners, that all of these healthy individuals who had been insured and were going to possibly be funneled into the exchange are now not going to go into the exchange, where a lot of unhealthy and older people are signing up.
And the president did a rather remarkable apology and a mea culpa, and, we messed this up.
Yeah, he definitely said, it was his fault. He didn't expect that all these cancellations would happen, and he said Americans have every right to expect for him to gain his credibility back.
Are we seeing sort of a revolt of the young and healthy? They're not signing up because they've been told we need you to help support the older and unhealthy. Are they rebelling on us?
I don't know if that's why they're not signing up. I did hear earlier this week, there was a conference call, and it sounds like we're not getting as many young people to sign up as we had hoped in these early stages, but that hasn't really, we don't know yet why they're not.
And it'll play out as we go forward, certainly, over the next several months. All right, let's turn now to food stamps. The bottom line is the poor are going to have to make do with less. Give us the details. What happened with this program?
Sure. A stimulus boost to food stamps expired November 1st, and that basically equates to a 5% cut in food stamps. And so that actually means about $36 less per month for a family of 4.
Okay, and you've done some reporting, of course, in City Heights, and you've focused a lot of reporting on a variety of stories there. Tell us about the impact in a working class neighborhood, a lot of low income folks there, and not just to individuals, but also to businesses, right?
Right. I think that a lot of people think that food stamps are being spent at liquor stores or convenience stores, but actually in City Heights, a lot of food stamps are being spent at the farmers market there. So people are using their food stamps to help sustain small regional farmers and even some of the refugee farmers who harvest vegetables from local community gardens, bring them to the market and try to get some money out of that. And so the food stamps at the farmers market can be up to $12,000 a month if
that's what the revenue into the farmers market is
right,
right
through food stamps.
Right.
And so if suddenly people stopped spending $36 a month there, they could see losing up to $7,200. So quite a chunk out of that.
Right. I should back up a little bit. The $36 a month, that's average for a family of 4 that they're going to see a decrease?
For a family of 4, yeah.
Okay. And that farmers market, and the story you did here recently on that in City Heights, that was a pioneer, wasn't it, in terms of taking food stamps for things like vegetables and healthier food?
Yeah, it was the first in the county and one of the first in the nation. And so it kind of beat the odds that this farmers market, which traditionally is in more upscale neighborhoods, has lasted 5 years in a very low income community.
Well, and it's very much in line with the philosophy of food stamps. People tend to think of food stamps as welfare. Actually, it's price support. And the agricultural community, large-scale agricultural community, has always supported it. It's a way to get people to buy their product or have the government buy their product. That small farmers are now cashing in on it seems to me very much in the philosophy of what food stamps is meant to be.
Except, of course, and in that sense, that's why food stamps are what's now known as a SNAP program, because they were trying to take a little bit of
We'll explain that initials for us.
Yeah. You can do the
Supplemental Nutrition Assistance
Thank you.
Program.
There we go.
Also called CalFresh.
It's a snappy phrase.
Exactly. Snapping fresh produce. So that's why they're bound together in legislation in Washington in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill isn't just the Farm Bill. It's not just for farmers, it also contains the food stamp program. And you see that on a microcosm level in San Diego, why these two things are actually so connected. Of course, they're trying to get split apart now. So as we're seeing them connected in this local moment, we're also realizing in the national scale, there's a fight over separating them into separate bills.
Right.
Now, if a poor family runs out before the end of the month, what options do they have here?
So the options could be that mom and dad skip meals so the kids can eat, or it's go to a food bank, go to your local church and go to their food pantries. And it's actually, I think it's interesting to note that the number of food pantries and food banks has really skyrocketed since the 1970s. I mean, there are tens of thousands in the United States, up from just hundreds. And so I think that the reliance on these is pretty acute.
And that's just going to increase. All right, I know we'll be doing a lot more reporting on that as we go forward. We're going to turn now to a very troubling case that involves reports of bribery within the Navy. Now, San Diegans are certainly familiar with allegations involving defense contractors. It wasn't that long ago when contractors were found to have bribed former Congressman Randy Duke Cunningham. Tony, tell us about this contractor now, Fat Leonard Francis. I gotta love that name. He's at the center of this new bribery scandal.
He's a Malaysian national, runs a firm out of Singapore, Glenn Defense Marine Asia, and he supplies U.S. ships and other ships throughout the Asia-Pacific area and has for decades called ship husbanding. When the ship rolls in, it needs water and garbage removal and food and security and tugboats and fenders and port fees, a lot of services. And we're Americans. We're everywhere in that area, forward presence, and we have a lot of ships, and it's real expensive, even when you're not getting ripped off. 5 persons indicted here in San Diego, 2 Navy lieutenants, a naval criminal investigating agent, and then Fat Leonard and one of his subordinates. Those last 2 were arrested here in this country and are being held without bail. The 3 Americans have bail. 2 admirals have been put on leave and taken their security clearance on looking at classified material has been taken away. It's not a criminal indictment. We don't quite know what the allegations are. They're sort of hinting it may have to do with being too close to Fat Leonard, and while not doing anything improper per se, giving the impression.
Of impropriety.
And the allegations are that the 2 Navy commanders leaked out information to Leonard and his firm about where Navy ships were going, and in some cases sent those ships a different place than they would otherwise have gone because Francis had a good relationship in that port. And he then billed either for things that were never done or overbilled. We don't know exactly how much. One of the prosecutors here in San Diego, when I asked that question, he said, well, in one port in Thailand for 1 year, we think the U.S. taxpayer got ripped off to the tune of $10 million.
Wow.
And they're looking at multi-years, multi-ports. Right. So do your multiplication. We're talking about how big this is.
Right. Now, what was it worth to these folks on the other end to give him this proprietary information to pad his business? They got all sorts of fun things.
They got a number of goodies, allegedly, according to the indictments. Prostitutes in foreign locales and fancy first-class flights here and there and first-class hotels, $100,000 to one of the Navy commanders, allegedly. Tickets to go see Lady Gaga. Tickets for the family to go see Lion King. And the girls in a whole bunch of different places. So it runs the gamut. And they communicated vis-a-vis email. And so the federal prosecutors have all these emails in which Francis allegedly is bribing with girls, these Navy commanders. And then some of the
Daddy
emails,
like was one of the responses allegedly in the
exactly.
papers.
And in one case,
talking about the prostitute party.
One of the commanders wanted to see a list of prostitutes broken down by age, height, and bra size.
Oh, my goodness.
So this is what we're doing here, allegedly.
So this is a classy case.
Yeah.
It is, and it's going to get bigger. The Navy says they expect other officers to be involved, other civilians to be involved, either on the criminal side or maybe on the Navy side where you can be scolded, bounced out, et cetera, for violations of Navy rules that aren't criminal per se. It's going to get bigger. It is said to be the biggest Navy scandal since Tailhook. Different kinds of allegations. Those were mistreating women at a riotous convention some years ago. This is out-and-out bribery, out-and-out loss of money. The Navy this week canceled more than $200 million worth of contracts with this firm. So they're not going to be pulling into port and have this firm helping them anymore.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up Tailhook, and I know a lot of our longtime members of our audience will remember that. And that changed the culture, launched a congressional investigation. I think it got the head of the Navy bounced way back when. Would this change the culture? I mean, it brings the question. You mentioned on the outset, 20 years this guy had a relationship with the Navy and contracts. Years ago, he had some gun charges that was reported in Stars and Stripes this week. So, you know, are they going to suddenly start looking at these contracts, which they rely on so heavily and much closer now?
Oh, I think so. Particularly because Asia-Pacific is the future. We're sending more ships to more ports for longer periods of time as we pivot our foreign policy towards that part of the world. Now, what jumps out at you, at least it jumped out at me in the indictments, is this is a lot of money, and the approval is being to pay certain bills is being made by people a long way away from the individual port. They're pushing paper through real quick, I would imagine. And you can start to see how it could happen if you don't bear down. They are now bearing down. In 2010, they noticed a bill for $110,000 for warehouses in a certain port, except that the Thai government, because it wants closer relationships with the U.S. Navy, had said, no fees, we're not going to charge you for that. But yet, Francis's firm, Fat Leonard's firm, allegedly tried to bill the American government for $110,000.
So was there a lack of auditing happening? I mean, is that one of the reasons it was allowed to go on for so long? And is that something that needs to be,
Right. And who's watching how our pennies are being
Right,
spent?
exactly. Who's minding the store?
Congress members on Armed Services Committee, that kind of thing, they're yelling bloody murder, as they should, about these allegations. I think there will be a lot closer scrutiny. But again, we're sending a lot of ships, a lot of places. We're going to be sending a lot more ships. There's just a lot of money. It is very expensive to run one of these large floating American assets, and there's just a lot of money moving through real quick. Now, there are competitors of this firm, and presumably we're looking at them to throw the business to them, and we're running them through a squeaky clean process to make sure none of this happens again.
So I want to shift gears briefly on a couple other military-related stories this week. First, the Navy and the Marine Corps are sending ships and personnel to aid in the catastrophic aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Who's headed there from San Diego? How are
Well,
they
so
going to help?
far we've got one ship there, a cruiser, Cowpens, is going as part of the George Washington Carrier Strike Group. I think they're already there. Now, being warmed up and getting ready is the Mercy, the hospital ship. It's really big. It would take 3 weeks to get there, but it would bring great capabilities. They haven't
It's
got
still a ways away. It's going to take a while. Yeah.
But that is indeed true, and the Navy will say yes, but when we get there, there will be needs, and there may be different needs than there are today.
now, yeah.
Infection, for example. Navy has a lot of experience with dealing with infectious disease, and they're getting those folks together when the order comes. Hasn't come yet, but when the order comes to deploy the Mercy, we're going to see people who will have expertise in what we think, what we know, the Filipinos are going to need for a long, long time. It's going to take about 3 weeks to get there.
Okay.
Because there's the first wave, obviously, of sort of the horrific damage from the
Sure.
typhoon, but then there's the second wave, which is what it means living without water and food
Indeed.
and hygiene and all of these things.
And security.
And security.
And the Marines are already there from Okinawa. We have hundreds of
help in
Marines bringing in food. We've got the George Washington Strike Group, and they have certain hospital capabilities themselves. So we've got an initial force, but long term, look for the Mercy. Look for other American assets, including from San Diego.
Now, briefly, the other story I wanted to touch on was these 4 Marines killed this week in this accident out at Camp Pendleton. Do we know much more about the fact that it was an accident on the training artillery range?
4 Marines from an explosive ordnance disposal team. That is an elite team that does this extraordinarily dangerous job. All were combat veterans. All had gone to Afghanistan. All had combat action ribbon. They only give you those if you have been under fire and return fire. These were veterans. Something went horribly wrong. Explosion, 4 dead, 2 injured. Investigation continuing. They were combing an area called the Zulu impact range, which hadn't been combed in 5 years. Could be a lot of mortars, a lot of large munitions, a lot of things dropped there. We just don't know. It's going to take a while
before that comes out. All right. We're in for one last fury now of robocalls, TV ads, and yard signs over the next few days. Campaigning is at fever pitch. San Diegans, of course, go to the polls on Tuesday in the special election to replace disgraced former Mayor Bob Filner. And in this odd sprint of a campaign, all the 3 leading candidates have versions of the same campaign mantra. It's all about neighborhoods. Sandia, let's start. Remind us briefly who these 3 leading candidates are and how the party affiliations break down in this race.
Well, you have 2 city council members. You've got Kevin Faulconer and David Alvarez, who stand on very different sides of the political divide. Faulconer being a Sanders model Republican, and Alvarez casting himself as a progressive, more aligned with former city councilwoman Donna Fry. And then you
Fighting for the little guy.
Fighting for the little guy, fighting for neighborhoods, outsider, all of that.
And then smack in the middle.
And then smack in the middle is Nathan Fletcher, who is quite literally smack in the middle, since in the last year he has gone from being a Republican to an independent and now is running as a Democrat. He was an assemblyman, and he had the most name recognition at the beginning of this race because he had run for mayor before.
Yeah, just last year, yeah.
You might remember it.
We might remember it. It seems like only yesterday. So, speaking of neighborhoods, one particular neighborhood issue has kind of crystallized this whole neighborhood mantra in the campaign, and it pits, as you say, David Alvarez fighting for the little guy, and Kevin Faulconer here, who's all about jobs and interests and the deep money folks who can bring us those jobs and keep the economy humming. Tell us about the Barrio Logan Community Plan and the fight down there.
Well, if you look at sort of the narrative legacy of Filner, there's one thing that stands out, and it is this mantra of neighborhoods. And you had them talking about it, all of the candidates saying, we're pro-neighborhood, and then all of a sudden, there was an on-the-ground moment where a neighborhood was at stake. And it is a small neighborhood. It is a neighborhood that it is mixed use. It hasn't had a new community plan or new zoning for 35 years. It's a hodgepodge of heavy industry next to schools and houses. So it's this complicated place that has kind of existed even though it shouldn't as a residential neighborhood. And so this is the first community plan that San Diego is trying to get going. And as they've been trying to figure out how to do it, they've really found this fight and this tension between the maritime industry and the ships and a select group of residents that say, we deserve sort of environmental justice. We don't want to have our kids growing up next to polluted sites. Now, one of the reasons this has taken on such sort of ramifications in this political campaign is that David Alvarez is very much and proclaims himself, and he's running on being a native son of Barrio Logan. He says he has asthma because he grew up there in a house sandwiched between two metal plating shops, and so he's been fighting for this plan. On the other side, you do have Kevin Faulconer who says, look, this will cost jobs, and so what you get is a reflection of two different philosophies of how to serve neighborhoods. Do you keep the jobs so that the neighborhoods can grow, or do you build the neighborhood so that jobs will grow there? And that really is a very Democrat-Republican divide.
What's the chances that we'll wake up Wednesday morning with a mayor-elect so we can start doing our Christmas shopping? We won't have to worry about a runoff campaign. Are we going to have somebody take it all next Tuesday?
Not likely. Not likely. I wouldn't place any bets on Vegas unless you wanted to have some Christmas money left.
The top man in the poll was Kevin Faulconer with 49%, which is a far cry from the 50+1 you have to avoid the runoff.
But things have been fluctuating so far back and forth,
right.
and also you're kind of looking at numbers that are changing and might change on Election Day because of turnout, which is oddly high in this race. You've got expectations that it might be anywhere from 44 to over 50%, which is for a special election way up there. I mean, it kind of sounds like it isn't that much, but it is. And you have most of the people who have voted in absentee ballots who have already voted, are coming from north of 8. They are people who are going to be going more conservative. They are people who are going to be tending towards the more San Diego status quo. Those we haven't heard from yet and might expect to hear from on Election Day, those are going to be those from south of 8.
Megan?
Yeah, south of 8 was really mobilized when they when they helped to elect Filner. I mean, what do we expect? Do we expect a lot of them will turn out during this election?
Right, because you mentioned a moment ago that the early ballots, the registrars voting, I think there was a National University analysis of this, that we have more people voting by mail, but are they skewed toward the people who are north of 8, and then the folks who are actually going to turn on Election Day, and the labor-back folks, which would be Alvarez's campaign, would maybe come out more in force? How do you figure that out at this point?
Well, I mean, you're basically, projecting into the dark. So just to be saying this, we are guessing. But here's what we can say is that we haven't seen the force from south of 8 that came out and elected Filner. There are many reasons from that. One is that this is, close to a holiday. It's kind of at an off time. Another is that it's not a presidential election. Those things always repress the progressive south of 8 vote. That's just kind of, par for the course. But the question is, because there has been so much focus, energy, and mobilization on the ground, especially around those neighborhoods, coming from not just Alvarez, but also from Nathan Fletcher. They're both doing these walking out in the community tours. What can we fix in neighborhoods?
Events every day. Yeah.
But
Exactly.
I think we do forget, though, that Alvarez isn't a lock south of 8.
Right.
He ran against Benueso's family. He ran against Juan Vargas's predilections. La Prensa has gone for Mike Aguirre. He's gone for Mike Aguirre, so he doesn't have a lock south of 8.
Absolutely, and that's why I say I think Nathan Fletcher has also gotten some of the unions, he's gotten some of the African American churches,
and I think south of 8, his military service will speak very loudly.
Exactly. So again, we really don't know what that will mean, where these votes will come to, or what it will finally be. And we can kind of say we think it's going to be 2 of these 3. I think that's the best bet we can make.
Right.
But other than that, we're just shooting in the dark.
I think we can say Mike Aguirre will not be in a runoff.
Yeah,
But his dog Winston might.
That would be the strangest development if we saw that. Let's talk a little bit about money. About $4 million raised so far, according to the figures we've reported on KPBS. Who's giving the most to whom here, and who's leading the money race so far?
Well, I believe that it's still Alvarez,
Yeah.
and I believe that that is because he got the support of the Labor Council, which was this sort of pivotal moment for him, and they went all in, not just local money, but state money and national money, which just sort of poured in to help him. And that's what, when people talk about getting out the vote, that's sort of where the money meets the road, right? In that if you're going to get out the vote and labor and boots on the ground, that's going to be kind of the way to do it.
Well, and he really needed it because, as we said, the name
not.
recognition, he wasn't nearly
You know
well.
what I find interesting is we have two rich men involved in this race, each with his own horse. We have Douglas Manchester, and his newspaper is pushing Faulkner and flailing Fletcher as any way they can. And we have Irwin Jacob, co-founder of Qualcomm. He loves Fletcher, who he hired after he crapped out in last year's race, and he's pushing Fletcher and possibly funding one of the independent, quote-unquote, committees. Interesting to watch two rich men, each with his own idea about shaping San Diego, waterfront for Manchester, Balboa Park for Jacobs, each pushing his own candidate. Interesting.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. And, of course, Tuesday is the big vote, as we'll be covering here on KPBS. That wraps up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, Megan Burks and Sandhya Dirks of KPBS News. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer, Senior News Editor at KPBS. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.